The night Julio Iglesias cried on stage. The concert nobody was supposed to remember. There is a concert that Julio Iglesias has never spoken about publicly. A night that his team tried to erase from the records. A moment that lasted less than 60 seconds, but reveals more about this man than 30 years of interviews ever did. This is that story. To understand what happened that night, you first need to understand what Julio Iglesias had built, and what it had cost him. By the mid-1980s, Julio was not simply a singer. He was a carefully constructed phenomenon. Every detail of his public image had been engineered with the precision of a Swiss watch. The open collar, the slow smile, the way he held a microphone like it was something fragile and precious. The way he looked at an audience, any audience, in any country, speaking any language, as though every single person in that room was the only person in the world. It was, by any measure, a masterpiece of performance. But here is what the cameras never showed. Here is what the interviews never captured. Behind that image was a man who had not slept a full night in years. A man who had been on the road for so long that hotel rooms had started to feel more like home than any actual home he owned. A man who had given so much of himself to the music, to the audiences, to the relentless machinery of global stardom, that there were moments in the silence between concerts when he genuinely could not remember who he was when nobody was watching. The touring schedule alone would have broken most people. In a single year during the peak of his career, Julio Iglesias performed over 200 concerts across 4 continents. 200 nights of standing under blinding lights, opening his chest to strangers, pouring everything he had into a performance that had to be, by his own uncompromising standard, perfect every single time. Imagine carrying that weight, night after night, city after city, year after year. And then imagine what happens when something cracks. The concert was in Spain. That detail matters more than it might seem. Everywhere else in the world, Julio Iglesias was a global superstar, admired, celebrated, placed on a pedestal so high that audiences related to him the way they related to monuments. Something magnificent and permanent and slightly unreal. But in Spain, he was something different. In Spain, he was still the boy from Madrid, still the goalkeeper's son, still the young man who had nearly died on a road and come back with a guitar and an impossible dream. Spanish audiences didn't just admire Julio Iglesias, they claimed him. He was theirs in a way that no French audience or American audience or Japanese audience could ever fully replicate. And that specific quality of being truly, deeply known was precisely what made Spain dangerous for a man who had spent decades hiding behind a perfect image. The venue was packed. Tens of thousands of people. The kind of crowd that generates its own heat, its own electricity, its own gravitational pull. The production was flawless. The band was tight. The set list had been rehearsed until it was automatic. Everything was in place. And then, midway through the concert, something happened that nobody in that arena had planned for. But what exactly triggered it? That is the part of the story that has never been fully told. He was singing, not performing, not executing a set list, singing. The way he had sung in that hospital room 20 years earlier, when there was no audience and no spotlight and no image to protect. Just a man and a melody, and something that needed to come out. The song, and those who were there that night, have never agreed on exactly which song it was, which itself tells you something about how disorienting the moment felt, was one he had sung hundreds of times before. A ballad, slow, intimate, the kind of song that, on any other night, would have washed over the audience like warm water and left them pleasantly moved. But something was different. Maybe it was Spain. Maybe it was the accumulated weight of years on the road. Maybe it was something personal, something that had happened in the days before the concert, that his team has never disclosed. Maybe it was simply the specific combination of that song, that crowd, that night, that particular quality of light. Whatever it was, it reached something inside Julio Iglesias that his professional armor had never fully protected. He stopped. Not completely. The band kept playing, but for a moment. A long, suspended, impossible moment. His voice broke. Not technically. Not in the way a singer's voice breaks from strain or illness. It broke the way a person breaks. And then, in front of tens of thousands of people, under lights that showed every detail of his face to every corner of that arena, Julio Iglesias cried. The crowd went absolutely silent. In 30 years of performing, nobody had ever seen this. Nobody had ever thought it was possible. Those 60 seconds, perhaps less, perhaps slightly more, became something that everyone present would carry with them for the rest of their lives. Not because it was dramatic, not because it was a spectacle, because it was real. In a career built on carefully managed emotion, on the art of making other people feel things while remaining himself in complete control, this was the one moment when the control dissolved, when the man and the performer became briefly and completely the same person. The audience didn't laugh. They didn't murmur uncomfortably. They didn't reach for their cameras. This was before the age of smartphones, before every moment became content, before privacy became a quaint historical concept. They simply held the moment with him. Some of them, by their own accounts given years later, began to cry themselves, not out of sadness exactly, out of recognition, out of the strange, overwhelming feeling of witnessing something true in a world that had become very good at manufacturing the appearance of truth. Julio recovered. Of course he did. He was, above everything else, a professional of the highest order. He steadied his voice. He finished the song. He finished the concert. But something had shifted in that arena. Something that couldn't be unshifted. The people who had come to see Julio Iglesias, the icon, left having met Julio Iglesias, the man. And the man, it turned out, was infinitely more interesting than the icon had ever been. His team, however, saw it very differently. By the next morning, the machinery had gone to work. There were no official recordings released from that concert. No footage circulated. No mention in the press, or at least no mention that survived. In the pre-internet era, controlling a narrative was still possible if you moved quickly enough and had the right people in the right places. Julio himself never addressed it publicly. Not in interviews. Not in his autobiography. Not in the countless television appearances and magazine profiles that followed over the subsequent decades. It was, to all official appearances, a night that had not happened. But here is the thing about 60 seconds of absolute truth witnessed by tens of thousands of people. It doesn't disappear just because nobody talks about it officially. It lives in the people who were there. It gets passed from person to person, city to city, year to year, in the way that only the most significant moments do. Quietly, persistently, with the particular durability of things that are genuinely felt rather than merely observed. Decades later, people who had been in that arena would describe the moment to their children, would say, "I was there the night Julio Iglesias cried on stage," would struggle to explain exactly why it had mattered so much, would find, in the struggling, that the explanation was actually very simple. They had spent their whole lives watching a man perform emotion, and on that one night they had seen him feel it. The difference, it turns out, is everything. And the question that nobody has ever been able to answer, the question that Julian himself has never addressed, is this: did he know in that moment that something had broken? Or was he, for the first time in 30 years, too far inside the feeling to see it from the outside? Some performances end when the music stops. That one never did.